Villegas for the MS PTC program at NJIT. Today I will be podcasting about the use of international English. International English, you may ask. What do you mean by international? Well, as the world becomes more multicultural with the expansion of the internet, English is becoming the most frequently used language on the internet, so it's important to address the nuances of the English language. British linguist David Crystal has written several books on the subject, such as English as a Global Language, and was quoted by many of my resources, including Carolyn Root in her book Technical Editing, saying that Crystal has determined that educated English is now a global lingua franca found in everyday use in many newspapers worldwide. Take this into consideration. In his book Do's and Taboos of Using English Around the World, Roger E. Axtell lists several statistics showing how English is becoming a predominant language worldwide. Did you know that 3/4 of the world's mail, telexes, and cables use English? That half of the world's technical and scientific periodicals are written in English? That 80% of the information stored in the world's computers is in English? Or that English is the language of sports, fashion, engineering, science, and the Olympics? R.W. Birchfield, the editor of the third and most recent edition of the style guide, Fowler's Modern English Usage, even added in his own preface that, quote, English is now the first or second language of most of the world and is also accepted, for example, as the basic means of communication in the control of air and sea traffic, end quote. So you can see it's important to address the similarities and differences of American English with English spoken and written in other parts of the world, particularly Britain and the British Commonwealth countries. After all, it's often expressed that the only thing other than the Atlantic Ocean that separates Britain from the United States is the use of the English language. Let's begin by putting this in perspective. Roger Axtell talks about a one-question quiz that was posed by the Brigham Young University's Center for International Area Studies, which asks, what country is being described? This country is about 200 years old. It was colonized by England. The people are rugged individualists who value their independence in their large, not yet fully developed land. Their founders were strong pioneering men and women, and many of the modern inhabitants believe that if they were faced with the same difficulties today, they could overcome them as well as their forebears did. They love sports and the outdoor life and enjoy one of the highest standards of living in the world. If you guessed the United States, you'd be right and wrong. This statement could also apply to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa as well, which over time have all developed their own versions of English as well. For the sake of this conversation, we'll stick to the differences of American and British English. There are at least two people we can hold responsible for starting to document these differences between British English and American English. The first was Noah Webster, who published the first American dictionary in 1828, as he, quote, wanted to Americanize the newly independent nation's written dialect, end quote. In her book Technical Writing, Carolyn Root comments, quote, interestingly, his recommendations that the American public eventually accepted are ones that could easily be accepted through the English-speaking world, end quote. The second person is H.W. Fowler, the original author of Fowler's Modern English Usage. Fowler published his book in 1926 with a domestic British audience in mind. Interestingly enough, he denied any knowledge of American English or English from elsewhere when writing his now famous style guide about the proper usage of various English words and expressions. There are 3 editions of the book still in print. Fowler's original most recently edited by David Crystal, a second edition edited by Sir Ernest Gowers, which is the edition that I personally have used for the last 20 years, and the third edition, which was edited by R.H. Birchfield in 1996. All editions are very helpful in understanding the proper use of words that sometimes get confused, such as effect and affect. Other than the spoken accent that clearly separates the sound of the language, very often a reader will see the differences between the writings of a British author and the writings of an American author through the spelling of certain words. How often, as an American reader, have you read a classic book by a British author and thought, Why is there a U in the middle of the word color? Or why are they using the word amongst instead of among? These are common spellings used in British English. These words have a slightly different spelling, yet have the same pronunciation and same meaning. Some other examples would be the words center, spelled with an ER in American and RE in British, or inflection, which is spelled with the ending of CTION in American and XION in British. Then there are words that have the same sound and have the same meaning, but are spelled completely differently, such as jail. In American, the word is spelled JAIL, whereas in British it is GAOL. There are even some words that even have slightly different spellings and a slightly different pronunciation, but they mean the same thing, such as the metal Americans call aluminum and the British call aluminium, which is complete with the extra I that you hear in the word. The other considerations to keep in mind when discussing the differences between British and American English, as Carolyn Rood points out, are tautonymy, which explains, quote, words that look the same but have different meanings, end quote, and heteronymy, which is when, quote, a word that has the same meaning in some contexts but a different meaning in others, end quote. These are big distinguishers in determining the differences between the two dialects. Let's start with heteronymy first. A good example of heteronymy would be the word cheap. As explained by Roger Axtell, quote, cheap, for Americans, connotes something of poor quality. In England, however, it is used more often to refer to something inexpensive, as in a cheap day ticket on the railroad, end quote. When looking at Axtell's analysis, an English speaker from either dialect could probably understand the word cheap in either context. But what most people find is the main difference between the two main versions of English is the many examples of tautonymy. Axtell also provides a great example of tautonymy using the phrase to table. In British circles, it would mean having an issue put up for immediate consideration. For Americans, it would mean to put it aside or delay the action. Here's another good example. What Americans call the subway, the British call the underground. And what the British call the subway is what Americans call a pedestrian underpass. No wonder it can get very confusing. Spelling and some of the usage explained here are just some of the examples of how American and British do have their differences. So in the end, is there such a thing as international English? Yes and no. We've looked at some of the similarities and differences between British and American English, which are the primary two dialects in the world. Due to geography and time, the schisms between the dialects have become more evident. Both versions of English still have influence as a second language. Countries that have British English as a first or second language are often former British colonies or British Commonwealth nations. Carolyn Rood points out that in most foreign countries, British English is most commonly taught as a second language. American English is taught as a second language only in Mexico, Central and South America, the Philippines, and other U.S. protectorates. So what is a writer to do? The best solution is to choose the version of English that works the best with the audience you are writing for, adapting your material for the local culture. Even Carolyn Rood suggests, quote, choose the spelling for the countries where most readers reside, end quote. That concludes our chat about American and British English, or international English. If you are interested in reading more about this topic, I recommend the book Do's and Taboos of Using English Around the World by Roger E. Axtell, as well as two books that I didn't cite in this podcast, namely Writing the Mother Tongue, From Old English to Email, The Tangled Story of English Spelling by David Woolman, and Britthink, Amerithink by Jane Walmsley. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast and found this information to be helpful. The works cited in this podcast include Roger E. Axtell's Do's and Taboos of Using English Around the World, published in New York by Castle Books in 2009, H.F. Fowler and R.W. Birchfield's Fowler's Modern English Usage, edited by R.W. Birchfield, the revised third edition, published in Oxford, England by the Oxford University Press in 2004, and Carolyn D. Rood's book Technical Editing, published in New York by Pearson Education, Inc. in 2006. This is Danielle Villegas, podcasting for MSPTC at NJIT, signing off. Cheerio!